Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Pat, and it's wonderful to be here, particularly because it's warm in Miami, and I know there are a lot of refugees from the polar vortex here in the audience today. But really, I'm truly honored to be part of a program that has so many accomplished people doing such important work. And of course, I'm proud to be here representing my colleagues at Susan G. Komen and our work in 30 countries around the world. And I feel right at home with the pink backdrop behind me. I was on the plane and I had my pink ribbon, wherever it is, and the man sitting next to me on the plane, we had a 2-hour delay, we sat on the tarmac, and he said to me, "Colon cancer." Oh, and started telling me everything he knew about colon cancer. So I got, and it wasn't much, but he repeated it over and over again. So it was a long ride we had. So before I begin, I would like to recognize Komen scholars who are with us at this meeting. Dr. Kim Blackwell from Duke and Dr. Julia White from Ohio State, who you heard from this morning. And we have 2 of our Brinker Award winners who are also on the program, Dr. Hyman Musk of UNC Chapel Hill and Dr. Jay Harris of Dana-Farber. It's gratifying to see our good friends and advisor here, and I know we'll all learn a lot over the next few days. Well, I confess I was a little bit daunted after a survivor breakfast in New York City last August where I met Dr. Borgen, and he invited me to speak at this conference. At that time, I had not officially joined Komen, and it seemed a bit early and perhaps even presumptuous to be invited to address such an eminent group of breast cancer experts. But Pat Borgen was a hard guy to turn down, and in the months since I've accepted his gracious invitation, I've gotten more comfortable with sharing my perspective on our common quest to create a world free of breast cancer. So as you heard, I'm not an oncologist, but I am a clinician and a former NIH researcher. And for more than 30 years, I've worked closely with the cancer community through my affiliations at the Institute of Medicine, NIH, VA, and others. So in those roles, I gained a perspective on what some call the intersection of science and society. I've had a bird's eye view of society's investments in cancer research and what those investments make possible. Like everyone here today, I spent a lot of time thinking about where we as a society ought to be investing our time and energy in the years to come. And as you've also heard, while we had the official war on cancer declared in 1971, it's fair to say that the breast cancer movement got its unofficial start 11 years later when Nancy Brinker founded Komen and began the national conversation about this disease. At that time, I was employed in the federal government, and if you typed in the word breast, the internet was immediately blocked for you, and I was working in a health setting. So the first Miami Breast Cancer Conference convened the year after that, so now we're here, both of us entering our 4th decade of work together. It's our middle age, if you will. Some of us here this morning know a little bit about middle age. I'm not going to be naming names, but it is common that once you get to middle age, you sort of shake your head at the things that you didn't know 20 or 30 years earlier and marvel at the things that you thought you knew, which turned out not to be so true. So it's a reminder that a lot has changed over those 30 years. 30 years ago, awareness of breast cancer was far more limited, screening mammography was far less common, and there was a little information publicly available about the disease. And as a result, most new diagnoses were stage 2, 3, and 4. Today, most diagnoses are stage 1, and a significant number of breast cancers are discovered by screening, as you heard. Back then, women had mastectomies. Often, those were radical mastectomies. Women didn't know when they went into surgery if they would wake up with or without their breasts. Today, Half of all patients, more than half, undergo conservative surgery, and patients play a major role in deciding their surgical options. 30 years ago, we had few chemo options, and today we have many more treatments, as you've heard and will hear, and targeted treatments, especially for HER2-positive disease. And finally, 30 years ago, women with metastatic breast cancer had few choices, faced long hospitalization, poor quality of life, and limited chance of survival. Today, we have more extensive options, but we know we have a lot more work to do with women and patients with metastatic disease. So times have changed, or rather I like to think about it as things have changed because you changed them. It's the clinicians and the researchers who made those changes happen for the benefit of patients. We tend to talk about our progress in macro terms, as in breast cancer rates falling by 34% since 1990, 5-year relative survival rates from early stage disease improving to 99% from 74% when Komen started. And that's understandable. We're in the science business and measurement is important. And big numbers like that are how we chart our progress. But we all know that numbers can seem abstract, and the struggle of those with breast cancer is anything but abstract. I know we've all seen the face of progress in the patients we encounter. I'm reminded of this at the same breakfast where I met Pat last August, when I was approached by a 14-year metastatic survivor. You know that someone who's lived with metastatic disease for 14 years gets to be an expert in the culture and language of breast cancer, and this woman was no exception. Not only is she an expert, but she also lived through a time of incredible change, and she attributes her survival to the work of research. She told me that when she starts to have new issues, new problems, that they're able to change her therapy. Something new is on the horizon that has kept her going for all these years. And this is information that she has read about what you are doing in your labs and your clinics, and it's a positive result that we should be very, very proud of in the breast cancer movement. And I've heard many similar stories in my few short months at Komen. I like to say it's felt like I've been drinking from a fire hose for my first. Next Sunday will mark my 6-month anniversary at Komen, but it's been a wonderful learning experience for me, and I'm here to learn from all of you as well. So, as a movement, we're somewhat older, but we're far wiser than we were in 1982. You might say that middle age has had its rewards. Our hard-fought wisdom has translated into millions of women and men living longer, better lives, and that's really worth celebrating. And while Miami Beach, and South Beach in particular, is a wonderful place for celebrating, that's not why we're here. We're here because there's so much work yet to be done. At Komen, we're confident that the progress I just described is only a preamble to greater breakthroughs on the way in areas like genomics and proteomics, for example, which will lead to advances in precision medicine. The work we're doing will lead, we hope, very quickly to a better understanding of risk, improved strategies for prevention and risk reduction, more accurate diagnostics, and specific and effective treatments. What we're focused on as we consider our role in the next phase of this mission is how do we hasten the advances which are looming on the horizon while continuing to support the millions still impacted by this disease. How do we do so in a world of stretched funding and limited resources? As you know, the first 30 or 40 years of the war on cancer were a bit of a funding bonanza. The money was abundant, and lots of people jumped on board to do this work. In breast cancer alone, hundreds of organizations have been formed. If you type in the word breast cancer in the Charity Navigator search engine, you come up with 1,400 results. That's 1,400 breast cancer organizations, and that's probably a bit of an underestimate. And breast cancer funding has grown exponentially as well, from a paltry $30 million a year in federal funds in 1982 to $1 billion, almost $1 billion in 2012, with $600 million of that coming from the National Cancer Institute. The Department of Defense adds about $120 million a year, and there are additional federal funds from the Department of Energy. I love to throw this out. Komen's first research grant in 1982 was for $28,000, and it was a big deal then. But since that humble beginning, we've invested more than $800 million in breast cancer research, making us the largest nonprofit funder of breast cancer research outside of the federal government. And as I stand before you today, Komen is funding 415 active research grants, totaling just under $250 million. And of course, I'm proud of that. As large as we are, we're just one funder. Our colleagues at the Breast Cancer Research Foundation, American Cancer Society, Stand Up to Cancer, to name but a few, have also made and continue to make significant investments in research to discover and deliver better treatment for this disease. And your own institutions are engaged in fundraising. And let's not forget pharma's investment in R&D since the early 70s to 2009 at $300 billion. We expect cancer funding to continue, and at somewhat high levels, but from these and other sources. But rather than the funding largesse that was so common during the go-go years, and I lived through the doubling of the NIH budget, and I know how difficult it was to spend all that money in a single year, we're already seeing some fundamental shifts. For example, a recent report was that over the last decade, while the budgets of the National Cancer Institute and the National Institutes of Health have grown modestly, their purchasing power, when you factor in biomedical research inflation, has shrunk by about 20%. So some of you may have felt that impact already from the grants you're applying for. And nonprofits may not be able to fill that gap as robustly as we've been able to do in the past. Most nonprofits have seen a slowing in donation over the past few years, especially in the grassroots funding most of us are engaged in. In fact, we read a report last week from peer-to-peer fundraising organization that revenues from event-focused fundraisers like walks and races are down about 3% in 2013 as compared to 2012. For organizations like Komen and the American Cancer Society, that translates into a decline of millions of dollars. This tighter environment means that there's less funding for research that's high risk, or to revisit well-established beliefs in the breast cancer world. We have to be investing for results, and the results can get to patients in the shortest period of time. Komen is re-examining not just how we support research, but all aspects of our mission to make sure we're generating the greatest return on our investments for the dollars entrusted to us by our donors. And there are some areas which Komen thinks are ripe for change. For example, for too many years, breast cancer organizations operated in a vacuum, raising dollars to fund research, some of which was duplicative with other funding. This may have grown from a mindset of nonprofit organizations acting like business competitors. But we think that it's time to change this approach, not just because there isn't a dollar we can afford to waste, but because it's just common sense that as many brilliant doctors, research scientists as there are engaged in this effort, at the end of the day, none of us is as smart as all of us. And the more collaborative and coordinated we are, the faster we're going to get results we all want. And Komen's already done this, in some ways from our very first day when we reached out to academic institutions to inform our funding choices, and especially in the advocacy space where we've worked with other cancer organizations to support big, important public policy and legislation. We built this collaboration into our funding structure in 2007 when we shifted our focus from basic science to translational research, and built into some of those programs a requirement for cross-functional, multidisciplinary work, as with our Promise Grants program. We've also changed some of our traditionalist thinking around working with other breast cancer organizations. Again, our ability and our willingness to work with other organizations going forward must be part of our DNA. It already is. Most of our international outreach is with NGOs, governments, and corporate partners. And our affiliates partner with more than 1,500 community organizations around the country to do their important work. And we've been in partnerships with organizations like ASCO and AACR for many, many years. Where we've been less likely to partner over the years is with other large national breast cancer organizations. Again, this goes to the mindset that nonprofits are competitors. So it was newsworthy last fall when the Dr. Susan Love Research Foundation, Komen, and the Young Survival Coalition agreed to work together on the Health of Women study, launched by Dr. Love. This was a step that I'm sure none of us had conceived of a decade earlier. But the three of us realized that even though we have different charters, different sets of priorities, and sometimes we disagree on important issues, there are things that we can do together and things we must do together to solve important problems and achieve the results that we all desire. And those results are worth putting aside old ways of thinking and taking a chance on some new ways. A few weeks after we announced the collaboration with Dr. Love, we're very pleased to announce, as a founding member of the Metastatic Breast Cancer Alliance, a consortium of 16 breast cancer organizations, including two of the largest, Susan G. Komen and the Avon Foundation for Women. I think most of us wish we had done these sort of things years ago. These are positive partnerships, and we're achieving good things. For instance, our organizations for the Health of Women study brought in 2,000 new enrollees in just a few short months, and there are plans to expand that study later in the year. The Metastatic Breast Cancer Alliance is in its very early stages, but we've already initiated a landmark analysis to assess gaps, duplication, and opportunities in the area of metastatic breast cancer, and how we can use that information to capitalize on existing programs. So I think you're going to be seeing more of collaboration and cooperation by design in the breast cancer world from the nonprofit organizations that fund your work. Because as funding gets tighter, as donors demand more accountability, and we'll all be better served by finding ways to work together that we might not have considered in the past, including perhaps joining forces for a foray into venture philanthropy, but that's another whole subject for another talk. So if we're going to build on the progress of the last 30 years, we need to partner not just across organizations and disciplines, but across generations. At Komen, we take very seriously our responsibility to ensure a continuity of breast cancer work, and we're sharpening our focus to supporting the next generation of researchers. We can't risk losing hard-earned momentum because talented young researchers are leaving the field. The physician investigators in the room know this all too well. You come out of residency, start your research career, spend time in the lab, you have clinical responsibilities, and there are only 24 hours in a day, and you're really stretched. I personally know this when I came out of, when I first went into NIH in a research position, and I was doing a lot of clinical work. I was trying to develop my own protocols and write grants, and I had 3 children under the age of 5. It wasn't easy, and there wasn't a lot of sleep. So with tightening budgets and more competition for dollars, the average age for the first research grant at the NIH is 44 years. People are trying to build their lives, build their homes, build their families long before the age of 44. And for many, and I've heard this from many of them, without the security of being funded as an investigator, the best option might be to leave the field. So Komen has supported young investigators since the 1990s through our postdoctoral fellowship and dissertation grants, and most recently through our graduate training in disparities research. Since the 1990s, we've awarded more than 500 postdoctoral grants, or a quarter of all the grants we've made in the past 24 years. And I'd like to share with you some preliminary results from a recent survey of the researchers who we funded. 88% of the postdoctoral fellows who responded to our survey tell us that they stayed in breast cancer research after completing their fellowships. 86% said they stayed in breast cancer research because of that grant. And we established grants for graduate training in disparities, and we've awarded 14 grants so far, supporting nearly 50 graduate students. So these are very important trends, and a trend we're determined to build on. We have the flexibility in our research funding portfolio to identify critical issues in breast cancer and direct funds to addressing them. In our view, the next generation of breast cancer research is one of our most critical responsibilities. So for that reason, we've declared 2014 the Year of the Young Researcher at Komen. And I'm announcing today that we're going to direct $30 million in new grants for our grant slate for the coming year, targeted toward young investigators, while continuing to support established researchers. We simply can't allow cancer researchers to become an endangered species. We have to enlist the best and the best and the brightest, and we have to hold them close. As we sharpen our focus on researchers who deliver tomorrow's breakthroughs, we're no less committed to those who are affected by breast cancer today. I spoke earlier of the intersection of science and society, and from a Komen perspective, we really live uniquely at that intersection. We've long believed that no amount of research will be effective if it doesn't deliver benefits to the people who need them. Nancy Brinker realized this when she founded Komen in 1982. And over the next 30 years, Komen built a network of community-based advocates and volunteers who focus on the unique needs of women and men with breast cancer close to home. The needs are as varied as the communities themselves. In some areas, we see issues around immigrants and minority populations. In others, rural areas, for example, our affiliates deal with issues around time and distance to treatment and access to care. In all of our communities, we're deeply concerned about access for low-resourced women and the medically underserved, and that's part of our challenge in the coming years. In the 3 decades, Komen affiliates, the 117 affiliates around the country, have funded $1.7 billion in programs to educate, screen, and provide access to quality cancer care for women and men who need it. So as long as there are people in need of our help, we're going to be there for them, just as we will continue to fund the research that will lead one day to prevention of this disease. And because 25% of what we raise in our communities, in the races and the walks, goes to funding national research There's a unique opportunity for you, our researchers and clinicians, to help us out on both fronts. As I said, we see ourselves at Komen as a bridge between the research and the communities of men and women who need what research has to offer. It's very important that these two realms stay connected and engage with each other, and that the folks walking and running in our communities all over the country understand how their involvement helps fuel tomorrow's breakthroughs, and that those of you in research don't confine your own engagement to your labs. We need your engagement, your ideas, and your advocacy in the communities we mutually serve. Don't be surprised if I'll call you up, or one of our affiliates will call you up, and ask you to be advocates for your own research and the research that enhances the entire biomedical enterprise, as well as advocating for improved clinical care. Or we may ask you to appear at local events where people see firsthand how your work is benefiting the global community and the local one. We'll ask you to write op-eds, blogs, and papers that can raise the dollars to keep cancer research vital. We need everyone's help. So let me just conclude by thanking you, Pat, once again for inviting me to join this group. And I would like to thank all of you for your attention, and even more so for your excellent clinical and research work. I'm truly excited and hopeful about what we can achieve together in the years to come. I spoke earlier of how different the world looks today than it did 30 years ago. We've made tremendous progress, yes, but, and I look forward to the day when I don't have to say but, as in we have far more to do. And I know you're longing for that day as well. So it'll be a great day when we've worked our way out of our jobs because we've defeated breast cancer. And for those cynics who tell me and you, and all of this is impossible, well, I think it's worth remembering that 30 years ago, we measured the seriousness of breast cancer by the size of the lump. So we have come so far. And there was no map showing us where to go 30 years ago, just as there is no exact roadmap today to show us exactly where to go next. But it's been said that in times of great change, what you need is not a map, but a compass. As our movement gets older and wiser, we're going to change course from time to time. But we'll be okay if our compasses remain set on true north, which in Susan G. Komen's world and in your world is a world without breast cancer. Thank you.